Chapter 9 A Voice in the Wilderness. As Titania was dumped in the middle of a desert on the Zalshuran side of Draksus, she continually felt the twin suns beat upon and burn her skin as she wandered exhausted without water. As she thirsts and is being scorched by the twin suns, she drags herself across the sand and calls out to the fey goddess Sylvanas and to her kingdom's pantheon, but receives no answer to her prayers. As her strength failed her, she collapsed completely ready to die in the middle of the desert, as crows circled her dying body. But before she could allow herself to die, a traveler came by and tended to her needs and with his partner and dragon companion. And as he saw Titania almost dead on the ground, he put water in her mouth and rubbed aloe on her burns, as his dragon companion Tatsu used her lightning magic as a defibrillator to restart Titania's heart after temporarily flatlining. As it was getting dark, the traveler and his partner took Titania to a shelter in their house to take care of her until she recovered.
Meanwhile, in the President's office of the Confederate Republic of Solsula, the President was having a meeting with his cabinet regarding the American Solsuran War on Draksus. His Secretary of Defense, Lee Sampson, opened by saying, "After the analysis of the previous doctrine regarding Draksus, it appears the doctrine of holding our ground and preventing the Americans from advancing any further has come to a close. They have seized a piece of one of our continents in a matter of 6 months, and if we do not respond with advances of our own into enemy soil, we are guaranteed to lose this war. And seeing how the public support for the war effort has dwindled greatly over the past 35 years, this war has to end quickly, which unfortunately leaves us with a difficult situation to make. With that being said, the only real options we have now is to either negotiate with the Americans on terms of mutual peace, or run the risk of nuclear war and mutually assured destruction." Then President George Salaris pounds his fist on the table and says to his Secretary of Defense, "If by mutual peace you mean surrender, there will be nothing mutual about it. Knowing their history, whoever surrenders to them will be dominated by them. You only need to look at the Indian tribes, the Southern Confederacy, and every other dragon-born kingdom they've annexed on Draksus, if you need an example of why we must never surrender to them. I also hope you all realize our republic is the only force strong enough to stop the Americans from completely taking over Draksus and subsequently the rest of our world. Though I'd hate to belittle our allies, they won't even be able to put as much of a dent in their forces. So, I ask you, Mr. Secretary, what do you suggest we do to advance on the American Republic, without it dragging us on forever without making excuses?" The Secretary of Defense then replies, "Well, first I'm going to tell you what we can't do, and expect to be successful or have it not resulted in mutually assured destruction. We can't expect to invade Earth and take over 4 million square miles of the North American continent, with every conventional weapon in our arsenal, simply due to such a project being a logistical hell. And if we get over just transporting all our conventional weaponry to Earth, terrain alone will render almost all our armored forces useless, and all our forces will be put in even more danger with a gun behind every blade of grass. Therefore, if we are to execute such a plan, we would have a 100% casualty rate before we even reach 100 miles inland. Thus, the only means of putting up an effective offensive against the American fatherland is to use nuclear weapons, which is only a surefire way to cause them to use nuclear weapons against us, which only guarantees mutually assured destruction for ourselves. And to make matters worse, they have the logistical advantage in a nuclear war due to their alliance with the Ceylonese Queendom, just across our northern border, and may even have nuclear weapons stored there as we speak. So, as long as we don't start a nuclear war, the logistical advantage the Americans have due to their alliance with the Ceylonese theocracy will become virtually non-existent. any American invasion of Solsura will be just as much of a logistical nightmare for them as it would be for us to invade the continental United States. And with a Zolshuran population armed to the teeth with 800 million guns and 40 trillion rounds of ammunition, the Americans won't make it 10 miles inland. So, for now, the fatherland is safe from any land invasion that would be necessary for American occupation. Another side of good news is improvements in anti-dreadnought weaponry. If we can destroy American dreadnoughts won't be a fleet-killing threat anymore. We'll be free to commence orbital bombardment on their entire hemisphere, until they either surrender or be completely annihilated. Then if what you tell me is true, I will sign an executive order to increase funding to the anti-dreadnought weapons system. But if this doesn't work, we're going to have some serious problems with the blood of Zulsura on your hands. While in the Oval Office, the Commander-in-Chief, President Ronald Jackson, was having a meeting with his newly appointed Grand Admiral of the United States Space Force, Grand Admiral Jedediah Jenkins. President Jackson then congratulated Grand Admiral Jenkins, saying, "Your campaign against the Zulshuran has gone better than expected. I must say, at this rate, the entire planet of Draksus will be ours and the Zulshurans will be forced to surrender in the next 5 years." Admiral Jenkins then calmly replied, "It is best if you keep your congratulatory speech for the press corps. I'm a man of results, not glory." The President then hands Grand Admiral a glass of champagne, but Jenkins puts it to the side and says, "I don't drink while I work, and if my men know what's good for them, they won't either. But if you want to celebrate with me, wait until after this war is over. Knowing the progress on Project Glass Cannon, soon the threat of nuclear war will be nullified, with the ability to cause unequally assured destruction against the Zulshurans. When the project is completed, we will have a planet-glassing superweapon, and a means to defend ourselves from Zulshuran nuclear weapons, while they won't be able to defend themselves once this weapon is fired. And with the new interstellar ballistic missile defense system including in the project, we can effectively render Zulsura's entire interplanetary nuclear arsenal entirely obsolete. Now if they wish to come to Earth and start a nuclear war, they must first penetrate our virtually impenetrable orbital defense fleet, only supplemented even further with our new Andrew Jackson-class dreadnoughts, rendering an invasion of Earth virtually impossible. And considering our successes in Draksus' low Earth orbit, single dreadnoughts have proven to be able to disable or destroy entire Zulshuran fleets. And if the Zulshurans send their ships here, they will meet a fate far worse than what they have experienced in Draksus' orbit." President Jackson then said with a look of relief, "Well, that's good news. Say, if you could win this war before the end of my second term, you're getting a raise." Admiral Jenkins then said to President Jackson while staring him in the eye, "Even if you do give me a raise for our presumable victory over the Zulshurans, I will not accept it. I'd rather go to those who have made sacrifices on the front lines, making victory possible for all of us." If only Congress and the career politicians maxing out their 3 terms and running on for their one and only term in the Senate could understand that. It has always been one of the hardest things for me to have to write letters to families who have had their sons and fathers killed or missing in action because of this pointless war. It also pains me to see that out-of-touch career politicians would rather keep this pointless war going so they can exploit it for their own political gain. After all, I made a promise to the American people that I would end this endless war, and I intend to keep my promises. If there's a means to end this pointless war with a nation that is much like our own without surrender, I would take such measures. But if peace can only be attained through strength and annihilation of our enemies, then so be it." Grand Admiral Jenkins then took a drink from his coffee and said, with a voice of approval, Perhaps you're one of the best presidents I've met in my lifetime, and I find it honorable that you keep your promises. You've built a great deal of respect and trust from the public and the Space Force because you keep your promises and have empowered us to do what we do best. That's why I voted for you this past election over the career politician who would rather abuse the office of Commander-in-Chief to fulfill his own political purposes rather than what's in our best interest. I see what you're saying with the Solsterans, and unfortunately, there aren't many options other than to conquer and annex them, or destroy them completely.
While in the place of Agron's new homeland, Titania couldn't help but distance herself from the others. While sulking and whimpering by herself, Agron's companion, Sylvia Fireheart, gently held Titania and soothed her while whispering a lullaby in the Zulsteran language in her native accent. And though she appeared imposing with her muscular build, imposing stature, and her light armor, her heart warmed with softness as she tried to comfort Titania through her troubles. Then Sylvia asked Titania with a soft voice, "What's wrong, dear?" as she gently strokes her fingers through Titania's golden hair. Titania's tear-stained eyes then stop shedding tears as she rests her emotionally drained head on Sylvia's lap. Sylvia then whispered to Titania, "You don't have to tell me," as she continues to gently hold Titania in her lap with her tungsten-strong arms as she removes Titania's golden crown. Shortly after resting her head, Titania had fallen asleep on Sylvia's lap, and Sylvia takes off her medieval-style rain cloak and uses it as a blanket to keep Titania warm through the night. Then she put a pillow under Titania's head and lets her sleep for the night as she asks her good friend and companion Agron, "Why would a princess be found in the middle of the desert, and then in a rainstorm, especially when she doesn't appear to be native to this planet?" Agron then dismissively replies, "Who knows? Maybe you should ask her when she wakes up in the morning." Sylvia then looks at Agron with a soft expression and says, "If she's up to it. She seems like she's been through something quite traumatic if she hasn't spoken to me yet. So, I'm gonna do my best to help her with anything she needs." Agron then crosses his arms and inquires, "And why would you help a stranded princess we know nothing about? For all we know, she could be the target of a high-profile Solsteran bounty, where we might get in trouble for helping her." Sylvia then put her strong hands on her solid hips and said, "I'm here to help her because you helped me in similar situations as her, when I was alone and no one to turn to. I was an outcast like her before you found me, and therefore I can relate to what she's feeling. I'd rather she not end up like me when the Americans destroyed my homeland." Agron then sighed at Sylvia, saying, "I'd hate to have to take care of a princess we know nothing about, especially since we're already running away from the American invasion of our former kingdoms. But knowing you and how you'd hate me if I didn't help her, I'll do it." Sylvia then embraced Agron with her strong body and kissed him on the cheek as his heartbeat rose from her touch, saying, "Even if you aren't doing this out of the purest of intentions, taking care of her is still a very noble thing of you. I always knew there was something good under those hard scales." "Just like you, Sylvia. Though your hands are as cold as ice, you have a warm heart. I wish I could have a heart like yours, but I'm just not capable of mustering up such feelings." Sylvia then put her hand on the back of Agron's shoulder and says, "I wouldn't say incapable of having a warm heart like mine, just different. Where I lack fortitude, you have strength. Perhaps separate we aren't much, but together, nothing would be impossible for us, even raising this girl in the way she should go." "Then perhaps we ought to take this princess under our wings and raise her right. A war-torn planet isn't a place for a princess of her age. With what little we have, we'll get her through it.
Agrin and Sylvia then made a pact that they will raise Titania in the way she should go, and will start as soon as it's morning.